Hello and welcome to Charlie's Desk. Today I'm just going to answer the question, what is an orientation and mobility specialist? So on the desk, in the bottom half of the desk, I have 3 books. From left to right, they are TAPS, the O&M curriculum by the Texas School for the Blind and Visually Impaired. In the center, I have Journey to Excellence, the development of the VA blind rehab programs by Stephen Miyagawa. And then I have the typed manuscript of Father Carroll's Blindness, what it is, what it does, and what to do about it. And then in the top half of the table, I have kind of the 3 most common types of canes that you're gonna see around town. A Revolution cane with a pencil tip, an ambu-type cane. This one has an ID tip, high mileage, basically like a pencil tip. And then a collapsible Chris Park cane. And the other 2 canes are, they're folding. The Chris Park cane is telescoping. So I have the camera really high up today so you can see the whole desk. So just step down off my chair. Woo! Very loud. Okay, so very basically, an orientation mobility specialist is someone who teaches safe and independent travel skills to people who are blind or visually impaired. And orientation mobility specialists, certified ones, have gone through a university training program. They've done occluded or blindfold training themselves in how to travel with a long cane. So gosh, where to start? Why not start with Father Carroll? Okay, so the development of O&M, or just like different kinds of approaches to the problems of travel without sight. They didn't get started on not until 1929, with the introduction to this country of the guide dog by the newly formed Seeing Eye Foundation. Was there any organized course in travel training? The use of the guide dog for travel was widely accepted by the general public, but met with very strong resistance in some areas of work with the blind. It did not result, however, in any organized course of travel training with any other tool. All right, so it's just the guide dog from 1929. It was not until 1944 that any organized program was devised for teaching newly blinded persons to make proper use of the cane. Then the new development came not from one of the existing agencies for the blind, but from a program with the United States Army established for the rehabilitation of blinded servicemen, led by a group of Army rehabilitation workers under Richard E. Hoover, a young enlisted man experienced in the physical education of blind children. The beginnings were made on what was then known as the Valley Forge cane technique, or the Hoover technique. Much further refined since that day, especially at the Veterans Administration Hospital at Hines, Illinois. The technique, now known as the Hoover cane technique, is now being taught at some of the rehabilitation centers and schools in this country and elsewhere. It is the only systemized body of knowledge on the use of cane travel that exists. All right, so let's go to some other things that he's referencing, which were the VA military program, and I'll go to chapter 6 of Stephen Miyagawa's Journey to Excellence books, the long cane. Evidence and history support the fact that prior to the mid-1940s, very little was done to effectively and efficiently develop mobility skills to enable the blind to travel independently. Now, this is true. I had one client, and she was over 90, and she had gone to Perkins before World War II, and she had RP, and she could see quite well as a kid, not enough to read print, so she left the sight-saving school and went to Perkins. And because she had good enough sight to travel, she was leading all the kids down to Watertown Square. There was no mobility training, and so she didn't get any mobility training until she was in her 90s, because she was just used to getting around with her vision, even though it was low vision. And there was no cane travel when she was a little girl. All right. So back to the Simiagawa book. Consequently, there were no instructors to teach the blind the complexity of foot travel. It was not until World War II, when large numbers of the war blind returned home, that the concept of mobility training, employing the use of the cane, was brought forth. Most of these veterans did not harbor any prejudice against the use of the cane or had preconceived ideas about mobility, but were anxious now to learn, to become independent so they could go on with their lives. In 1944, Colonel Elliot Randolph, on the medical staff in Washington, D.C., searched for men in the military who had experience working with the blind. Through his interventions, Corporal Richard E. Hoover and Technical Sergeant C. Warren Bledsoe were transferred from the Army Engineers and the Air Corps, respectively, to the newly formed unit at Valley Forge Hospital. The rudiments of long cane travel were developed by these two men, all right? The rudiments of long cane travel are developed by Richard E. Hoover and Tech Sergeant C. Warren Bledsoe. They were specially selected to help meet the mobility needs of soldiers who were blind and awaiting surgical treatment, or when medical circumstances permitted them to start the training. The long cane travel technique they invented was still in the embryonic stage when hostilities ceased, all right? So O&M's really not that old. With the end of the war, the fate of this method of mobility threatened to become tentative and grim unless other rehabilitation entities continued to experiment with it, all right? So they invented it, but it wasn't necessarily going to catch on. Fortuitously, Bledsoe was delegated to establish the rehabilitation venue in Hines, Illinois, and Williams was appointed to re-energize and refine the training methodology that kept the long cane viable. So that's talking about Russell Williams, who was a blinded soldier who he did a ton to develop the long cane. He trained a lot of, he was primarily responsible for training the first orienters, which I'm about to read about. This gave new life to long cane travel technique. This new life to long cane travel technique emerged with vigorous zeal. Warren and Bledsoe gave the initial lecture, and Williams, Alvin S. Childs, and Catherine Gruber from Seeing Eye Foundation were there as active participants. After that, the training was essentially in the hands of Williams. During this time, Richard Hoover was already deeply involved in the medical training, right? He was, studying ophthalmology, and the rigors of the curriculum limited him to no more than 3 visits to oversee the progress that Williams was making at Hines. Outside of occasional observations by Bledsoe and Hoover, the developers of the long cane techniques, Williams had this singular opportunity to train his fledgling staff to meet his own rigid standards, Suterco, he was one of the original sort of orienters. So that gives Russell Williams a ton of credit. I'm just turning to a couple of pictures of the first group of orienters, the people who were involved there. There's 12 pictures, and there's 3 black guys there who I never knew about before. So it's nice to know there was some diversity in the field right in the beginning, even if we've kind of are trying to steer ourselves back towards that. And then the last book is just the TAPS curriculum. So it wasn't until the 60s that they first started teaching O&M like in school districts and stuff like that, and it started happening in Chicago. Robert Gauckman, he started teaching O&M with the Catholic Charities student in 1966. So that's when it first started being taught in schools. And then you have TAPS, which is a full curriculum with all kinds of evidence-based approaches and orientation mobility. They say instruction is age-appropriate ongoing travel training that teaches students with visual impairments to move safely, purposefully, and efficiently in the home, school, work, and or community settings as independently as possible. Back in 1929, the only way to travel independently if you were blind was maybe using a guide, or they had started with the Seeing Eye Foundation. Flash forward to 1944, if you were a blinded soldier, you might have access to this training. Flash forward to 50 something, Father Carroll founds the Carroll Center, so you could get it if you were an adult who was blinded now, if you were in the Northeast, or could get to the Carroll Center, and then forward to 1966, you could get it if you were a kid in school. So O&Ms, just to sum up, we teach independent travel skills, primarily using the long cane and all the conceptual stuff, and you have to go through the long cane training first if you want to get a guide dog. So yeah, this is just my little video about what is an O&M specialist. Thanks for watching, and have a great day. Bye.